The moment Silas Croft told her to crawl, Leon Joe knew she'd reached the bottom of hell itself. Not the hell of losing her husband in a mine collapse 3 months back. Not the hell of eating nothing but dandelion roots for 2 weeks straight. This was worse. The kind that strips away everything you thought you were and leaves you raw in front of strangers who've already decided you're worth less than the mud on their boots. But she didn't know yet that the man about to walk through that door would change everything. That his silence carried more weight than all their cruelty combined. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind that morning had teeth. Leanne felt them the moment she stepped out of the canvas lean-to she'd been calling home since they'd thrown her out of the boarding house. February in Montana Territory wasn't just cold, it was personal. The kind of cold that found every hole in your clothes, every empty space in your belly, and reminded you exactly how close you were to disappearing entirely. She wrapped the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did about as much good as wrapping yourself in newspaper. Her fingers had gone past hurting into that numb gray space where you stopped being sure they were still attached to your hands. But she had to move, had to try. The town of Prosperity Creek stretched out before her like a broken promise. 23 buildings, if you counted the half-collapsed barn at the south end. Most of them leaned slightly, like they were tired of standing up. The main street was frozen mud-rutted deep from wagon wheels, and the boardwalks on either side were gap-toothed and splintered. It wasn't much, but right now, it was everything. Leanne's stomach cramped hard enough to make her stumble. She caught herself against a fence post, waited for the wave to pass. When was the last time she'd eaten something that wasn't just hot water with hope stirred in? 3 days? 4? Time got slippery when you were this hungry. She forced herself to straighten up, tried to smooth down her hair, though she knew it was filthy and tangled past fixing without a proper washing. Her dress, the same one she'd worn to bury her husband, the only decent one she owned, hung loose now. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. But she had to look respectable, had to look like someone worth helping. The general store sat at the center of town like a fat spider in its web. Croft's Mercantile, the sign said, painted letters fading but still readable. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window she could see the warm glow of lamplight. People moved inside, blurry shapes that meant warmth and food and everything she didn't have. Leanne stood across the street for a long moment, trying to gather courage that kept slipping through her fingers like sand. Just ask, she told herself. That's all. Just ask. But she knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing had been simple since the day the mine foreman showed up at her door with his hat in his hands, and that look on his face that said, "I'm sorry for your loss," without having to speak the words out loud. Zhang Wei had been a good husband, not perfect. He gambled sometimes, drank more than he should, but good. He'd worked himself half to death in those copper mines trying to save enough to bring them somewhere better. Somewhere they wouldn't be the only Chinese faces in a sea of white ones. Somewhere his wife wouldn't have to lower her eyes and make herself small just to walk down the street. He'd died for $30 a month in a dream that would never come true. And now Leon was alone in a town that had never wanted her in the first place. She crossed the street carefully, watching for ice. The boardwalk creaked under her feet. Through the window, she could see Silas Croft behind the counter, his thick arms crossed over his barrel chest. He was talking to someone, laughing at something. The sound was muffled by the glass, but she could tell it was the kind of laugh that came easy when your belly was full and your pockets weren't empty. Her hand shook as she reached for the door handle. The warmth hit her first when she stepped inside. Actual heat from an actual stove. It felt like being slapped. Her eyes watered and her nose started running, and for a second she couldn't see anything except golden blur. Then the voices stopped. The store wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. Maybe 8 or 9 people scattered among the shelves and barrels. A woman in a green dress standing near the fabric. 2 miners still in their work clothes looking at tools. An older man she didn't know examining tins of tobacco. They all turned to look at her. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Leanne kept her eyes down and moved toward the counter. She could feel their stares like physical weight pressing against her skin. Could almost hear what they were thinking. Chinese woman, widow, probably here to beg. They weren't wrong. Silas Croft didn't move from his position behind the counter, arms still crossed. He was a big man, tall and wide, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved with a dull axe. His beard was more gray than brown now, and his eyes were small and mean. Help you? His voice carried across the room like a challenge. Leon stopped a few feet from the counter, swallowed hard. Mr. Croft, I come to ask, speak up, can't hardly hear you. She raised her voice, though it cost her something to do it. I come to ask if maybe you have work, anything. I can clean, Don't need cleaning. I can cook, I'm good cook, got no use for Chinese cooking. Folks around here like their food to taste like food. Someone snickered behind her. Heat flooded her face, but she pushed on. Please, just small work. I don't ask much money, just enough for... For what? For rice? Croft leaned forward, his hands flat on the counter. Let me tell you something, girl. Your husband died owing me money. $12.40. You think I'm going to give you work when you already owe me? The floor seemed to shift under her feet. I didn't know. He never say... Well, he did. And now that debt's yours. But I have nothing. I can't... Then you should have thought about that before you came in here wasting my time. Leanne's throat tightened. She blinked hard, refusing to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Please. I'm very hungry. If you just give me little food, I can work for... You want food? Croft's voice rose, filling the store. You want me to just hand out food to every beggar that comes through my door? I'm not beggar, You look like a beggar to me. You smell like one too. The snickers weren't hidden anymore. Someone coughed to cover a laugh. Leanne felt something inside her crack. Please, I haven't eaten 3 days. Just bread. Just little... You want bread? Croft reached under the counter and pulled out a half loaf, hard and old. He held it up. This here's yesterday's bread. Would have fed it to my hogs, but I suppose a Chinaman's widow is about the same thing. Her hands trembled. She reached for it. He pulled it back. Not so fast. Nothing's free in this world. You want this bread? You're going to have to earn it. Yes, I work. No, not work. His smile was ugly. You're going to get down on the floor, right here, right now, and you're going to crawl to me on your hands and knees like the dog you are. You're going to beg me proper. You do that, maybe I'll give you this bread. The room went absolutely silent. Leanne stared at him, not quite believing she'd heard right. What? You heard me? On your knees. Crawl and beg. I can't. Then starve. Makes no difference to me. She looked around the room, desperate, searching for even one kind face. But they all just looked back at her with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to openly entertained. The woman in the green dress had turned away entirely, suddenly fascinated by a bolt of calico. The miners watched with folded arms. The old man with the tobacco was smiling. Nobody was going to help her. Leanne turned back to Croft, to the bread in his hand. Her stomach cramped again, sharp and vicious. 3 days. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. How much longer could she last? Another day? 2? Her knees felt loose. The floor seemed very close. I'm sorry, she thought, though she wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. Her dead husband? Her ancestors? Herself? She started to lower herself down. The door slammed open with a crack like a gunshot. Cold wind blasted through the store, scattering papers and making the lamp flames dance. Everyone turned toward the sound. A man stood in the doorway. Not stood, filled it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Snow dusted his shoulders and clung to his dark beard. His eyes were ice blue and cold enough to make the February wind seem warm. Caleb Vance. Even Leanne knew that name, though she'd never spoken to him. Everyone in Prosperity Creek knew Caleb Vance, the rancher who lived alone in the mountains, the man who'd lost his family years ago and hadn't been the same since, the man people crossed the street to avoid, not because he was dangerous exactly, but because there was something about him that made you feel like you were standing too close to a cliff edge. He didn't say anything, just stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him, and looked around the room with those pale eyes. His gaze landed on Leanne, still half crouched by the counter, then moved to Croft, then to the bread still in the merchant's hand. Vance? Croft's voice had lost some of its swagger. Didn't expect to see you in town today. Caleb walked forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He moved like he had all the time in the world, like there was nothing in this room that could possibly concern him. He stopped next to Leanne, close enough that she could smell horse and leather and pine smoke. "Stand up," he said quietly. It took her a second to realize he was talking to her. She straightened, her legs shaking. Caleb looked at Croft. "What's happening here?" "Private business. Nothing to do with you." Didn't ask if it was my business. Asked what was happening. Croft's face reddened. "The Chinaman's widow owes me money. I was just explaining that to her." "How much?" $12.40. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He opened it, counted out coins without looking, and tossed them on the counter where they rang against the wood. $15. That covers the debt and whatever she needs from your store." Croft stared at the money like it might bite him. "Now hold on. Take it or don't. Makes no difference to me, but this conversation is over." "You can't just—" Caleb turned to face him fully, and whatever Croft saw in his eyes made the rest of that sentence die in his throat. The silence stretched out, tight and fragile. Finally, Croft snatched up the coins, his movements jerky and angry. "Fine, her debt's paid, but that don't give you—" "She'll take flour, beans, salt pork, coffee if you've got it, and that bread you were waving around. That bread's—" "Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, bread." Croft's jaw worked like he was chewing glass, but he moved. Started pulling items off shelves and slamming them on the counter with more force than necessary. The other customers had gone very still, watching this unfold like they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. Lynn stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to speak, afraid that if she did anything at all, this impossible moment would shatter and she'd wake up still on the floor being told to crawl. Caleb didn't look at her, just waited while Croft wrapped everything in brown paper and twine, his movements angry and sharp. When it was done, a pile of packages sat on the counter, more food than Leanne had seen in months. "Anything else?" Croft's voice was acid. Caleb picked up the packages with one hand like they weighed nothing. Then he looked at Leanne. "You got somewhere to stay?" She found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. Yes, I have place." "Where?" By the creek. Canvas shelter." Something flickered across his face. "Canvas." "Yes." "Storm's coming. Big one. You won't last the night in canvas." I'll be okay. No, you won't." He looked at her properly for the first time, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been recognition, like he knew exactly what it felt like to be where she was standing. "You'll freeze to death, or the wind will tear your shelter apart. Maybe both." "I have nowhere else. You do now." He turned toward the door. "Let's go." "Wait." The word came out sharp, panicked. "Go where?" "My ranch. Storm will last 2, maybe 3 days. You can stay until it passes." "I can't." He stopped and looked back at her. "You got a better option?" She didn't. They both knew she didn't. I don't know you." "No, but you know him." Caleb jerked his head toward Croft. "And every other person in this room who was happy to watch you crawl for stale bread. So you can take your chances with them, or you can come with me. Your choice." It wasn't really a choice. They both knew that too. Leanne looked around the store one more time. At the woman in the green dress who still wouldn't meet her eyes. At the miners who looked vaguely disappointed that the show was over. At Silas Croft, who was watching her with open contempt. At the bread she'd almost debased herself for. She turned back to Caleb and nodded once. "Good." He pushed the door open. Wind howled in, bringing snow with it. "Storm's maybe an hour out. We need to move." She followed him out into the cold. The horse was the biggest animal Leon had ever seen up close. A massive bay gelding with a white blaze down its face, standing patient in the street while snow swirled around its legs. It didn't even twitch when Caleb approached. He tied the packages to his saddle, working quickly and efficiently. Then he swung up into the saddle and looked down at her. "You ever ridden?" "No." "You're about to learn." He held out his hand. "Put your foot in the stirrup and swing up behind me." Leanne stared at his hand. It was broad and scarred, the kind of hand that had done hard work for a long time. She was aware, suddenly, of how small she was, how weak, how utterly at his mercy she'd be once she got on that horse. But the wind was picking up, and she could see dark clouds rolling in from the west like an advancing army. She took his hand. His grip was solid and sure. He pulled her up with no apparent effort, and she found herself sitting behind the saddle, her legs dangling awkwardly. "Hold on to me," he said. She hesitated, then wrapped her arms around his waist. She could feel the warmth of him through the sheepskin coat, could feel the solid muscle underneath. He clicked his tongue, and the horse started moving, turning north out of town. The motion was strange and frightening, but the horse's gait was smooth. They rode in silence through the outskirts of Prosperity Creek, past the last scattered houses and into open country. The land here was all rolling hills and scattered pine, beautiful in a harsh way. Under different circumstances, Leon might have appreciated it. The wind was definitely picking up now. She could feel the temperature dropping, could see the snow starting to fall harder, big wet flakes that stuck to everything. "How far?" she asked, having to raise her voice over the wind. 5 miles, maybe 6. That sounded impossibly far, but the horse kept moving, powerful and steady beneath them. They crested a hill and Lion looked back. Prosperity Creek was already small behind them, its buildings dark against the white landscape. Smoke rose from chimneys, bent horizontal by the wind. She wondered if anyone was watching them go. If anyone cared, probably not. "What you did back there?" Her voice was muffled against his coat. "Why?" Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "Seen enough people get kicked when they're down. Didn't feel like watching it again." "You don't know me." "No." "You don't owe me anything." "No." "Then why?" Another long silence. The horse's hooves crunched through the snow. The wind howled. "Had a wife once," he said finally. "Sarah. And a son. Thomas. He was 5. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Town turned on us. Long story. Don't matter now. But I know what it's like to need help and have everyone look the other way. Know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer because other people decided you weren't worth their time." "What happened to them?" "They died. Fever took them both in the same week. But they would have lived if the doctor had come. If anyone had helped." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "That was 7 years ago." Leon didn't know what to say to that. There weren't words for that kind of loss. She knew she'd lost her husband, but a wife and a child, both at once? "I'm sorry," she said, "because what else was there?" "Don't be. Wasn't your fault." He clicked his tongue again, urging the horse faster. "Storm's coming quicker than I thought. We need to move." The snow was falling hard now, thick enough that Lion could barely see 20 feet ahead. The wind cut through her thin clothes like they weren't even there. She pressed closer to Caleb's back, stealing his warmth. They rode into the storm. Time lost meaning in the white chaos. Leanne couldn't see anything except Caleb's back and the horse's neck and the endless swirl of snow. The wind screamed like something alive and angry. The cold sank into her bones deeper than she'd thought possible. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Couldn't feel her hands either, though she knew they were still wrapped around Caleb's waist because he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid and white. Her mind started to drift. She thought about her husband, about the last morning she'd seen him alive. He'd kissed her forehead and told her not to worry, that the mine was safe, that they'd have enough money soon to leave this place. She'd believed him because she'd wanted to, because hope was easier than truth. She thought about her mother back in Guangdong, who she'd never see again, who probably didn't even know her daughter was alive or dead, thousands of miles away in a land of ghosts and gold and broken dreams. She thought about the bread in Silas Croft's hand and how close she'd come to crawling for it. "Stay with me." Caleb's voice cut through her wandering thoughts. "Don't fall asleep." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. I can feel it. Stay awake. We're almost there." She tried to focus, tried to grip him tighter, but her body wasn't responding the way it should. Everything felt distant and slow. Then suddenly they were moving through trees, big pines that blocked some of the wind. The horse slowed, picking its way carefully. A shape emerged from the white. A building. Solid and real. The cabin was bigger than she'd expected, built from thick logs with a steep roof to shed snow. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, dark and weathered. Caleb guided the horse up to the barn and dismounted in one smooth motion. Then he reached up for Leon. "Come on." She tried to swing her leg over, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Her muscles were locked up from the cold and the riding. Caleb didn't wait. He just grabbed her around the waist and lifted her down like she weighed nothing. Her legs buckled when her feet hit the ground. He caught her easily. "I got you." Then he scooped her up, one arm under her knees, one behind her back, and carried her toward the cabin. Behind them, the horse followed on its own, knowing where home was. The cabin door wasn't locked. Caleb kicked it open and carried her inside, and the warmth hit her like a wall. He set her down in a chair near the stove. An actual chair, not a crate or a rock, an actual piece of furniture. Then he moved quickly, building up the fire, adding wood until the flames roared. Leanne sat there shaking, unable to stop. Her teeth chattered so hard it hurt. Caleb disappeared for a moment, then came back with a heavy blanket. He wrapped it around her shoulders without a word, then went to work on her boots. "I can," she started. "No, you can't. Your fingers are frozen. Just sit still." He got her boots off, then her socks, examining her feet with a critical eye. "No frostbite. You got lucky." He rubbed her feet briskly, bringing the blood back. It hurt worse than the cold had, a burning pins and needles pain that made her gasp. "I know," he said, "but it's good. Means you're not dying." Such a strange thing to say. Such a strange day. When the feeling returned to her extremities, painful and prickling, Caleb stood up. "I need to take care of the horse. You stay here by the fire. Don't move." "Okay." He grabbed a lantern and headed back out into the storm, closing the door firmly behind him. Leanne sat alone in the quiet cabin, listening to the wind howl outside. The fire crackled and popped. Slowly, terribly slowly, warmth crept back into her body. She looked around, taking in her surroundings for the first time. The cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft above. It was sparse but well made. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with books and tools. Everything neat and organized. On the wall above the fireplace, there was a single photograph in a simple frame. A woman with kind eyes and a small boy on her lap, both smiling. Sarah and Thomas. Leanne looked away, feeling like she'd seen something private. The door opened again. Caleb came in carrying the packages from the store, snow in his beard and on his shoulders. He set them on the table, then shrugged out of his wet coat and hung it on a peg. "Horses settled. Storm's getting worse." He moved to the stove and started a pot of coffee. "You hungry?" Leanne realized she was, desperately, terribly hungry. "Yes. I'll make something." He worked efficiently, pulling out supplies, building a simple meal. Beans and bacon in a pan, bread sliced thick. The smell that filled the cabin was almost painful in its richness. When it was ready, he served her a plate, an actual plate, not a tin cup or a piece of bark, an actual ceramic plate, and set it in front of her. Leanne stared at the food, more than she'd seen in months. Her hand shook as she picked up the fork. "Go slow," Caleb said, sitting across from her with his own plate. "You haven't eaten in a while. Too much too fast will make you sick." She tried to listen, tried to eat slowly, but her body had other ideas. She shoveled the food in, barely tasting it, desperate and animal. Caleb didn't comment, just ate his own meal in silence. When she'd finished, scraping the plate clean, soaking up the last of the bean juice with bread, he refilled it without asking. This time she managed to slow down, to actually taste the food. It was simple, plain, exactly the kind of thing any rancher might eat. But to her, it tasted like the finest feast she'd ever had. Outside, the wind screamed. The cabin shook slightly, but held firm. "This storm," Leanne said. "How long?" 2 days minimum, maybe 3, hard to say." "And you live here alone?" "Yes." "Don't you get lonely?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Used to. Don't think about it much anymore." They finished eating in silence. Caleb collected the plates and washed them in a basin. Leanne watched him move around the cabin, economical and precise, a man used to doing things by himself. "The loft," he said, pointing up. "You can sleep there. I'll stay down here." "I don't want to." "Wasn't asking. You need proper rest, and I'm not going to sleep anyway. Storm makes me restless." Leanne looked at the ladder leading up to the loft. She was exhausted, bone-deep tired, but she was also aware of how strange this situation was. Alone in a cabin with a man she didn't know, miles from anywhere, with a storm raging outside. Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. I'm not going to hurt you. If I wanted to do that, I wouldn't have brought you here. You're safe. You got my word on that." She believed him. She didn't know why, but she did. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I can't repay you." "Don't want repayment, just—" He trailed off, looking at the fire. "Just get some rest. We'll figure out the rest when the storm passes." Leon climbed the ladder to the loft. There was a mattress up there, actual bedding, pillows that smelled like pine and wood smoke. She crawled under the blankets fully dressed and felt the luxury of being warm and fed and safe. Below, she could hear Caleb moving around, the creak of floorboards, the scrape of a chair, the pop and hiss of the fire. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Leon felt something that might have been peace. She closed her eyes and let herself fall into sleep. Leon woke to the sound of something crashing. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness of the loft, heart hammering. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was too close. The air smelled wrong. Everything felt strange and foreign. Then memory rushed back. The cabin. The storm. Caleb Vance. Another crash from below, followed by the howl of wind so loud it sounded like the mountain itself was screaming. She crawled to the edge of the loft and looked down. The main room was lit by the dying glow of the fire. Caleb stood by the door, bracing it with his shoulder as wind forced it inward. Snow swirled around his boots where it had blown through the gap. "Latch snapped," he called up, not taking his eyes off the door. "Need to fix it before the whole thing blows in." Leon scrambled down the ladder, her feet hitting the cold floor. "What can I do?" "There's rope on that shelf. Bring it here." She found the coil of rope and brought it to him. He took it with one hand, still holding the door with his body weight. "When I say you're going to pull that inside latch across, it's stuck, so you'll have to force it." "Okay." He counted down. 3, 2, now. Leon threw her weight against the latch. It fought her, frozen or warped or both. The door bucked against Caleb's shoulder, and she heard him grunt with effort. "Come on," she muttered, straining. Her fingers slipped on the cold metal. She adjusted her grip and tried again, putting everything she had into it. The latch gave way with a screech and slammed home. Caleb immediately started threading the rope through the handle, tying it off to a hook embedded in the log wall. His movements were quick and practiced. When it was secure, he stepped back, breathing hard. The door rattled and shook but held. "That'll do for now," he said. Only then did Leon realize she was standing barefoot on the freezing floor, wearing nothing but her thin dress. She'd thrown off the blanket in her rush to help. Caleb noticed at the same time. "Get back to the loft. You'll freeze down here." "What about you?" "I'm fine." But he wasn't. She could see it now, the way he favored his left shoulder where he'd been bracing the door, the tightness around his eyes. "You're hurt. Just bruised. Nothing serious. Let me see." "It's nothing." "Let me see," she said again, more firmly this time. He looked at her for a long moment, then shrugged out of his shirt with a wince. In the firelight, she could see the damage. A dark purple bruise spreading across his shoulder and down his arm, where the door had slammed into him repeatedly. Leon sucked in a breath. "That's not nothing. I've had worse." "I'm sure you have. Sit down." "I don't need—" "Sit down." To her surprise, he did. Lowered himself into one of the chairs by the fire, like his body was relieved to stop holding itself upright. Leon looked around the cabin, taking quick inventory. She spotted what she needed on a shelf. A jar of something that looked like salve and a clean cloth. She brought them back and stood behind Caleb's chair. Up close, the bruise looked even worse. The skin was hot to the touch, swollen. "This is going to hurt," she warned. Figured. She applied the salve as gently as she could, working it into the damaged tissue. Caleb didn't make a sound, but she felt him tense under her fingers. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "My mother, she was, what do you call it here, a healer. In our village, people came to her when they were sick or hurt." "She teach you a lot?" "Some. Not everything. I left before—" Leon trailed off, focusing on her work. "I left before I could learn everything." "You miss her?" The question was simple, but it hit harder than she expected. "Every day." She finished with the salve and wrapped the cloth around his shoulder to keep the worst of the cold off. Her hands lingered there for a second longer than necessary. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly. "You saved my life." "This is nothing." "Didn't save your life. Just gave you a warm place to wait out a storm." "You know that's not true." He didn't argue, just reached for his shirt and pulled it back on, moving carefully now. The wind howled again, shaking the walls. Snow hissed against the windows like thrown sand. "How long has it been?" Leanne asked. Caleb pulled out a pocket watch and checked it. "Storm started maybe 8 hours ago. We've got a long way to go yet." "And if it doesn't stop?" "It will. Always does, eventually." That's not very comforting. Wasn't trying to be comforting, was trying to be honest. Despite everything, Leanne almost smiled. There was something refreshing about his bluntness. No false reassurances, no pretty lies. Just the truth, hard and cold as the storm outside. "You should try to sleep more," Caleb said. "Nothing we can do until morning anyway." "What about you?" "Told you, storm makes me restless. I'll keep the fire going." Leanne climbed back up to the loft, but she didn't sleep. She lay there in the dark, listening to the storm and the sound of Caleb moving around below. The creak of floorboards, the clank of the stove door opening and closing. At one point she heard the scratch of a match and smelled tobacco smoke. She thought about what he'd said earlier, about his wife and son, about the town turning on them, about watching them die while no one helped. 7 years he'd been alone up here. 7 years of this same cabin, this same silence, this same self-imposed exile from the world that had failed him. How did someone survive that without going crazy? Maybe he had gone crazy, she thought. Maybe that was the only way to survive it. Eventually, despite her intention to stay awake, exhaustion pulled her under again. When she woke the second time, pale gray light was filtering through the gaps in the shuttered windows. The wind had died down to a dull roar instead of a shriek. Progress, if you could call it that. She climbed down the ladder and found Caleb asleep in the chair by the fire, his head tipped back, mouth slightly open. He looked younger like this, less hard. The lines around his eyes had smoothed out and his jaw was relaxed. She moved quietly, not wanting to wake him, added wood to the fire, found the coffee pot and filled it from the water barrel, then set it on the stove to heat. There were eggs in a basket and bread from yesterday. She could make breakfast. The problem was she didn't know where anything was. She opened cupboards as quietly as possible, looking for a pan, for salt, for anything she could use. Top shelf on the left. She jumped and turned around. Caleb's eyes were open now, watching her. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I don't sleep heavy." He stood up, rolling his injured shoulder experimentally. "How'd you know I was awake?" "Your breathing changed." He looked at her with something that might have been approval. Observant. "Learn to be. In Prosperity Creek, you have to pay attention to know when trouble's coming." Trouble's always coming in places like that, just a matter of when. He helped her find what she needed, and together they made a simple breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toasted bread, coffee so strong it was almost bitter. They ate in comfortable silence while the storm raged on outside. "It sounds different," Leanne said. "The wind. It's shifting, backing around to the north." "That's good. Means it's passing through faster than I thought. We might only be stuck here 2 days instead of 3. And then what?" "Then I take you back to town." Something cold settled in Leanne's stomach at those words. Back to town. Back to that canvas lean-to by the creek. Back to hunger and cold and people like Silas Croft. Caleb must have seen it on her face. "You got people there? Family?" "No, no family." "Friends?" She shook her head. "Work?" Another shake. "So what were you planning to do? After the storm?" "I don't know." The honesty of it surprised her. "I hadn't thought that far. You were starving yourself to death in a canvas tent, and you hadn't thought past the next meal?" "I was trying to survive. That doesn't leave much room for planning." Caleb poured himself more coffee, staring into the cup like it held answers. "You got any skills, things you can do?" "I can cook, clean, sew. My husband said I was good at numbers, keeping track of money, but nobody's going to hire a Chinese woman to keep their books." "No." "What about going back to China?" Leanne laughed, sharp and bitter. "With what money? The trip here cost everything we had, Everything our families had. There's nothing to go back to, even if I could afford the passage. Other towns then, bigger places. San Francisco, maybe. More Chinese there. You could what? Walk there? It's hundreds of miles. And even if I made it, then what? I'd be just as alone there as I am here. At least in Prosperity Creek, I knew which white faces to avoid. The words came out harsher than she meant them to. She waited for Caleb to take offense, to tell her she was being ungrateful or bitter or any of the other things people said when you spoke uncomfortable truths. But he just nodded. Fair point. They washed the dishes together. Caleb's movements were stiff. The bruise was bothering him more than he'd admit, but he refused her offers to help. The day stretched out long and slow. There was nothing to do but wait. No work to fill the hours, no distractions from the monotony of being trapped inside while the world outside tried to kill you. Leon found herself watching Caleb when he wasn't looking, studying him, trying to figure out what kind of man he really was. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was direct and honest. No flowery words, no attempts to impress. He moved through the cabin like a ghost through a familiar haunt, automatic, practiced. Everything in its place. Everything done in a specific order. 7 years of routine had worn grooves into his life that he followed without thinking. Around midday, he disappeared into a corner and came back with a deck of cards, so worn the edges were soft. You play? He asked. Play what? Poker. I don't know how. I'll teach you. They sat at the table and he walked her through the basics. The hierarchy of hands, the betting rounds, the strategy of when to fold and when to push. Why are you teaching me this? She asked as he dealt another practice hand. Passes the time, and you should know how. Poker's a useful skill, tells you a lot about people, how they think, what they value, when they're lying. Is that why you play? To read people? I play because it's something to do with my hands that isn't work. They played for hours, using dried beans as chips since neither of them had money worth betting. Leon lost the first dozen hands badly, but she was a quick study. She started to see the patterns, started to understand when Caleb was bluffing and when he actually had something. You're getting better, he said, after she won a decent pot with nothing but a pair of sevens. You're letting me win. Maybe the first few. Not that one. That was all you. Something warm flickered in her chest at the praise, small as it was. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the cabin, something strange was happening. Something Leon couldn't quite name, not friendship exactly, that seemed too presumptuous after less than a day, but maybe the beginning of understanding. Two people who'd been hurt by the world, finding temporary shelter from it together. Tell me something, Caleb said, shuffling the cards. Why'd you come to Montana? Of all places, why here? My husband heard there was work. Good money in the mines. He said we could save enough to buy land somewhere. Start over. And you believed him? I wanted to. Isn't that the same thing? No, not even close. Leanne picked up her cards from the new hand. 2 queens. Not bad. What about you? You grew up here? Nebraska. My father had a farm. Wheat, mostly. Caleb's voice was flat, telling the story like it had happened to someone else. I was supposed to take it over when he died, but I didn't want to be a farmer. Wanted to see mountains. So I came west, worked cattle, saved enough to buy this place. And your wife, Sarah? He was quiet for a long time. Leon thought maybe she'd pushed too far, crossed some invisible line, but then he spoke. Met her in town. She was a school teacher, came from back east to civilize the frontier or some such nonsense. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She lasted 3 weeks before she realized what a mistake she'd made, but by then we were married. How long were you together? 6 years. Thomas came along in year 2. He laid down his cards, 3 of a kind. She never complained, not once. Even when things got hard, even when the town... He trailed off. She was better than all of them. Better than me, too, probably. What happened? With the town, I mean. You said they turned on you. Caleb gathered up the cards and started shuffling again. The rhythmic whisper of card against card filled the silence. We had a neighbor, a man named Douglas. He wanted my land, had this idea that if he could connect his property with the section south of me, he'd control the whole valley. Made me an offer. I said no. He didn't take it well. So he what? Started rumors? Worse. Started saying that she and I weren't properly married, that Thomas was illegitimate, said he had proof that she'd been with another man back east. All lies. But people believed what they wanted to believe. Leon felt sick. They shunned you. More than that, they made it clear we weren't welcome. Shopkeepers wouldn't sell to us. Church wouldn't have us. When Thomas got sick, the doctor refused to come. Said he had other patients, more important cases. Caleb's jaw clenched. Sarah got sick trying to take care of him. I rode for help, begged, offered everything I had. No one would come. And they died. Fever broke on the 4th day, but by then they were too weak, too far gone. His hands had stopped shuffling. I buried them both on the hill behind the house, next to each other so they wouldn't be alone. Leon reached across the table and put her hand over his. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it, just did it. Caleb looked down at their hands like he'd forgotten what human contact felt like. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know those words don't mean anything, don't fix anything, but I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." "That doesn't make it hurt less." He met her eyes then, and she saw something raw there, something that hadn't healed despite 7 years of trying. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." They sat like that for a moment, hands touching, the storm howling outside. Two people carrying grief they couldn't put down. Then Caleb gently pulled his hand away and started dealing cards again. "Your bet." The moment passed, but something had shifted. Some wall had developed a crack. They played until the light started to fade. Caleb lit lamps and made dinner, salt pork fried with potatoes, simple and filling. They ate in silence again, but it was different now. Easier. Less like two strangers forced together by circumstance, and more like two people who'd decided to stop being strangers. After dinner, Leanne noticed a stack of books on one of the shelves. She pulled one down. Whitman. Poetry. "You read?" Caleb asked. "Some. My husband taught me English when we first married. Said I needed to know it if we were going to make it here." She opened the book carefully. "I'm not very good yet. A lot of words I don't understand." "Pick one." "What?" "Pick a word you don't understand. I'll tell you what it means." So she did, and he explained it, patient and clear. Then she picked another, and another. They went through 6 poems that way, Caleb translating the difficult words, occasionally reading passages aloud so she could hear how they were supposed to sound. His voice was different when he read, softer, less guarded. "You like poetry," Leon said. It wasn't a question. Sarah did. She used to read to Thomas before bed. He paused. "I kept her books. Thought about burning them once. Decided that would be like killing her twice. You still read them. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, reminds me there's more to the world than this." He gestured vaguely at the cabin walls. "Even if I never see it. You could leave, find somewhere new." "Could. Won't, though." "Why not?" "Because they're here. Up on that hill. And if I leave, there's nobody to remember them. Nobody to—" He stopped, swallowed hard. Nobody to care that they existed. Leanne understood. After her husband died, the mine foreman had asked where she wanted him buried. She'd picked a spot near a big pine tree because Zhang Wei had always talked about planting trees when they got their own land. It was a small thing, meaningless probably, but it mattered. The dead needed someone to remember them. Otherwise, what was the point of any of it? "I go to his grave sometimes," she said. "My husband's. I bring flowers when I can find them. Talk to him." She laughed softly. "I know he can't hear me, but I do it anyway." "What do you say?" "Mostly I apologize for not being able to keep his dream alive, for failing." "You didn't fail. You're still here, still fighting." "Fighting for what? Another day in a canvas tent? Another week of stealing scraps? That's not living. That's just existing. Sometimes existing is enough. Sometimes it's all you've got." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with shared understanding. Outside, the wind had died down to almost nothing. The storm was passing. Leon felt an unexpected twist of something like disappointment. Once the storm passed, this strange interlude would end. She'd go back to town, back to reality. and Caleb would return to his self-imposed isolation. This brief connection, this moment of not being alone, it would end like everything else ended. "You should get some sleep," Caleb said, breaking into her thoughts. "Morning's going to come early." She nodded and climbed the ladder to the loft. But before she settled in, she looked down at him. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For everything. Not just the food and the shelter, but for—" She searched for the right words. "For treating me like I'm a person, like I matter." He looked up at her, his face half in shadow. "You do matter. Don't let anyone tell you different." Leon lay down in the warm blankets, those words echoing in her head. "You matter." When was the last time someone had said that to her? When was the last time she'd believed it? She fell asleep to the sound of Caleb moving around below, tending the fire, keeping watch through the night, keeping her safe. When morning came, the storm had finally died. Leon woke to silence, real silence, not just a lull between wind gusts. She climbed down to find Caleb already up, standing at the window looking out. "It's over," he said without turning around. She joined him at this window. The world outside was white and still. Snow covered everything in thick drifts, smoothing out the rough edges of the landscape. The sky was clear, pale blue, the sun just starting to rise. It was beautiful. Harsh and unforgiving, but beautiful. "We should be able to make it back by afternoon," Caleb said. "Road's going to be rough, but the horse can handle it." "Right, of course." She waited for him to say something else, to acknowledge what had happened over the last 2 days. But he just turned away from the window and started preparing breakfast. They ate quickly, not talking much. Caleb packed up supplies, more than what they'd bought from Croft's store. He added extra blankets, dried meat, matches, other things she might need. "You don't have to—" Leon started. "I know." They saddled the horse and headed out into the white world. The cold was sharp and clean, nothing like the murderous wind from before. The horse moved slowly, picking its way through the deep snow. Lynn sat behind Caleb again, arms around his waist, but this time she wasn't numb with cold and fear. This time she could actually see the country they were passing through, the way the mountains rose up in the distance, the pine forests heavy with snow, the vast empty spaces that seemed to go on forever. "It's different," she said, "in daylight." "Most things are." They rode in silence for a while. Then Leon asked the question that had been building in her chest since she woke up. "What happens when we get back? To town, I mean. What do you want to happen?" "I don't know. I can't go back to how things were before. I can't—" Her voice cracked. "I can't do that again." Caleb was quiet for a long time. The horse's hooves crunched through the snow. A hawk circled overhead, dark against the pale sky. "You got options," he said finally. "Not great ones, but options. You could try to find work in another town. Helena, maybe. Or Butte. Bigger places have more opportunities. And more people who don't want Chinese there. Yeah, that too." He paused. "Or you could stay in Prosperity Creek, try to make it work somehow." "With what?" "I have nothing. No money. No skills they'd value. No—" "You could stay here." The words were so quiet she almost missed them. "What?" "At the ranch. You could stay. Work for room and board. I could use help around the place." Leon's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a place, a safe place. No one comes up here. No one bothers me. You'd be—" He trailed off. "You'd be safe." "Why would you do that?" "Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, and because—" He stopped, started again. "Because that cabin's been empty for 7 years. Maybe that's long enough." Leon didn't know what to say. Couldn't speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. "You don't have to decide now," Caleb said. "Think about it. See how you feel when we get back to town." But she already knew. Had known since she woke up that morning and realized she didn't want to leave. The cabin, the quiet, the simple dignity of work and warmth and being treated like a human being. Him. They rode on through the white silence, and Leon held on a little tighter. Prosperity Creek looked smaller than Leon remembered. Meaner, too, somehow. The snow had transformed it into something almost pretty from a distance, but up close you could still see the rot underneath. Peeling paint, crooked buildings. That same feeling of a place that had given up on itself a long time ago. They rode in slowly, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. People stopped to stare. A woman hanging laundry, two men outside the saloon, a kid throwing snowballs at a fence post. All of them watching as Caleb Vance came down the main street with the Chinese widow sitting behind him. Leon could feel their eyes, could practically hear the gossip starting already. Caleb didn't seem to notice or care. He guided the horse straight to Croft's Mercantile and dismounted, then helped Leon down. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. The bell over the door jangled as they walked in. The store was warmer than outside, but not by much. Silas Croft stood behind his counter, and his face went through several expressions when he saw them. Surprise, then anger, then something that might have been calculation. "Vance," he said. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon. Need more supplies." "That's so." Croft's eyes slid to Leon. "Thought you were just passing through. Storm's over now." "Plans changed." "What kind of plans?" Caleb pulled out his money pouch and set it on the counter with a heavy thunk. "The kind that aren't your business. Now are you going to sell me what I need, or do I have to ride to Helena?" The threat was casual but clear. Croft knew as well as anyone that Caleb's money was good. Probably better than half the credit accounts he carried for the locals who paid whenever they felt like it. "What do you need?" Croft asked, his voice tight. Caleb rattled off a list. Flour, sugar, coffee, beans, rice, salt, lamp oil, soap. More than one person would need. More than he'd bought in years, probably. Croft gathered the items with jerky, angry movements, slammed them on the counter one by one. "That everything?" he asked when he was done. "Need fabric too. Couple yards of wool. Something warm. Wool's expensive." "Didn't ask how much it cost. Asked if you had it." Croft's jaw worked like he was chewing nails, but he turned and pulled down a bolt of dark blue wool. Cut off 3 yards with sharp, vicious snips of the scissors. The total came to $18. Caleb counted it out without blinking. As Croft wrapped everything up, he couldn't seem to help himself. "So what, you're keeping her now? Like a stray dog?" The words landed in the quiet store like stones in a pond. Caleb went very still. When he spoke, his voice was soft and cold. "Say that again." Croft had enough sense to look nervous. "I just meant—" "I know what you meant. And I'm telling you right now, you're going to keep those kinds of thoughts to yourself. She's working for me. That's all anyone needs to know. Working for you doing what? Whatever needs doing. Not that it's your concern. People are going to talk, Vance. You know that. Let them talk. Won't be the first time. Won't be the last." Croft shoved the wrapped packages across the counter. "Fine. But don't come crying to me when— I won't come to you for anything except supplies. And if you've got a problem with that, I can take my business elsewhere." "Your choice." The threat hung in the air. Everyone in the store, and there were more people now, drawn by the sound of raised voices, knew that Croft's Mercantile lived and died on steady customers. Losing Caleb's business would hurt. Croft swallowed whatever else he wanted to say. "No problem here." "Good." Caleb gathered up the packages and headed for the door. Leon followed, keeping her eyes down, feeling the weight of all those stares pressing against her back. Outside, Caleb tied the supplies to his saddle with sharp, angry movements. "You didn't have to do that," Leon said quietly. "Yes, I did. It's going to make things harder for you. People will— I don't care what people think. Stopped caring about that 7 years ago." He finished securing the last package and turned to face her. "Question is, do you care?" Did she? A week ago, she would have said yes, would have bent herself into whatever shape people wanted just to survive another day. But standing here now, remembering how it felt to crawl toward that piece of bread, remembering Croft's ugly smile. "No," she said, "I don't care." Something that might have been approval flickered across Caleb's face. "Then let's get out of here." They rode out of town the way they came in, past the staring faces and the whispered conversations, past the buildings that leaned and the lives that were stuck. Leon didn't look back. The ride to the ranch took most of the afternoon. The sun was low and golden by the time they crested the last hill, and the cabin came into view, smoke curling from the chimney where Caleb had banked the fire before they left. It looked different to her now. Not like a temporary shelter from a storm, but like something more. Something that could be permanent if she let it. They settled the horse in the barn, working together to brush him down and fill his feed bucket. The familiar rhythm of chores felt good after the tension of town. Inside the cabin, Caleb built up the fire while Leon unpacked the supplies. She found herself automatically organizing things the way she'd noticed he liked them. Coffee on the left, flour on the right, everything in its place. "You don't have to do that," Caleb said, watching her. "I know, but if I'm staying, I should—" She stopped. They both heard it, the words she'd just said without thinking. If I'm staying, not a question anymore. A statement. Caleb met her eyes. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm more sure about this than I've been about anything in a long time." He nodded slowly. "Okay then, we should talk about how this is going to work." They sat at the table with coffee, and Caleb laid out the terms. She'd have the loft, same as during the storm. He'd stay down below. She'd help with cooking and cleaning and whatever else needed doing around the ranch. In return, she'd have food, shelter, safety. "I can't pay you much," he said. "Not in cash anyway, but I can give you a share of whatever we sell. Eggs, milk when the cow freshens, vegetables from the garden come spring." That's more than fair. And we need to be clear about something else. He looked uncomfortable now. People are going to assume things. About why you're here. About what's happening between us. "I know. I'm not, He stopped. Started again. I'm not expecting anything from you except work. You understand?" Leon felt heat rise to her face. "I understand." "Good. Because I want you to feel safe here. Really safe. Not just from starving or freezing, but from," he gestured vaguely, "from everything." "I do feel safe. With you." The words came out softer than she meant them to, more honest. Caleb looked down at his coffee. "Okay. That's okay." They fell into an awkward silence, both suddenly very interested in their drinks. Finally, Leon spoke. "What should I do first? Tomorrow, I mean. What needs doing? Chicken coop needs cleaning. Been putting it off for weeks. And there's mending, shirts and such. Never been good with a needle." "I can do that." "And we'll need to start planning for spring. Garden needs to be bigger if we're feeding too. More seeds to buy, more ground to clear." "We." He kept saying "we," like it was already decided, like she was already part of this. The thought sent something warm spiraling through her chest. They talked through the evening, planning and organizing. Caleb showed her where everything was, explained the routines he'd developed over the years. When to feed the chickens, how to work the pump, which logs burned best and which ones just smoldered. "It's a lot to remember," Leon said. "You'll get it. Takes time, but you'll get it." That night, lying in the loft, Leon listened to the familiar sounds of Caleb moving around below. But this time, it felt different. This time, she knew she'd hear those same sounds tomorrow night, and the night after, and the night after that. For the first time since her husband died, she had something like a future. The days fell into rhythm after that. Not easy. Nothing about ranch life was easy, but steady. Predictable in a way that felt almost luxurious after months of chaos. Len woke before dawn and started the fire. Made coffee while Caleb tended the animals. They ate breakfast together, usually in silence, then split up for the day's work. She learned quickly how to collect eggs without spooking the hens, how to churn butter, how to patch clothes so the stitches didn't show. Things her mother had tried to teach her years ago that she'd been too young and stubborn to appreciate. Caleb taught her other things. How to read weather in the sky. How to stack wood so it dried properly. How to handle an axe without taking off her own foot. "Like this," he said, positioning her hands on the handle. "Let the weight of the axe do the work. Don't muscle it." She tried again, and this time the log split clean. "Better," he said. It was the most praise she'd gotten in months, and it felt like winning something. They didn't talk much during the day. Both of them seemed to understand that silence was easier than conversation. But in the evenings, after dinner, things loosened up. Caleb would read aloud sometimes, working through his wife's old books. Poetry mostly, but sometimes stories. Leon would sit and listen, mending or knitting, letting the words wash over her even when she didn't understand them all. Other nights they played cards. Leon got better, good enough that she won almost half the time now. "You're a quick study," Caleb said one night after she bluffed him out of a big pot. I had a good teacher. Or I'm getting soft. Maybe both. He almost smiled. It was rare, but when it happened, it transformed his whole face. Made him look like someone who remembered what it was like to be happy. Leanne found herself trying to make him smile more often. Small jokes, stories about her day. It became a kind of game. How long could she go before getting some reaction out of him? You're stubborn, he told her once. Takes one to know one. That got a real laugh, short and rusty like he'd forgotten how. Winter deepened around them. More storms came, but the cabin held firm. They were ready now, stocked with supplies and wood enough to last until spring. One night, about 3 weeks after Leanne had moved in, she woke to the sound of someone moving around below. Not the usual sounds of Caleb banking the fire or checking the doors. This was different, restless, agitated. She climbed down the ladder quietly. Caleb was pacing by the window, still in his nightshirt, his face tight with something that looked like pain. Can't sleep? She asked. He jumped, not having heard her. Sorry, didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. What's wrong? Nothing. Just... He rubbed his face. Today would have been Thomas's birthday. He would have been 12. The words hung in the dark cabin. Leanne didn't know what to say. What could you say to that kind of hurt? She did the only thing she could think of. Went to the stove and made tea, real tea, some she'd been saving from the supplies Caleb bought, and brought him a cup. They sat together in the near dark, drinking tea, not talking. Finally, Caleb spoke. Some days are harder than others. The birthdays. The anniversaries. Days when something reminds me and it all comes back like it just happened. What was he like, Thomas? Curious. Drove Sarah crazy with questions. Why is the sky blue? Where do stars go during the day? How do birds know where to fly? Caleb's voice was soft, remembering. He wanted to be a doctor when he grew up. Liked helping things. Once he found a baby bird that fell from its nest, kept it in a box by his bed, fed it with an eyedropper. Thing actually survived. He sounds wonderful. He was. They both were. Caleb stared into his tea. I don't talk about them much. Easier not to. But sometimes I worry I'm forgetting. Small things, like what Sarah's laugh sounded like, or the exact color of Thomas's hair. It scares me that I might lose even the memories. You won't, Leanne said firmly, because they're part of you. Not just in your head, but in everything you do. The way you take care of things, the books you read, the kindness you showed me when no one else would. She paused. They're still here. In you. Caleb looked at her, and in the dim light she saw his eyes were wet. Thank you, he said roughly. They sat together until the tea was gone, and the first gray light of dawn started seeping through the windows. Then Caleb went out to tend the animals, and Leanne started breakfast, and the day began like any other. But something had shifted again. Another wall crumbling. The weeks rolled on. February gave way to March, and with it came the first tentative signs of spring. The snow started melting in patches. The days got longer. The air smelled different, less sharp, more alive. Caleb and Leanne worked together to prepare the garden plot, turning over the soil that had frozen hard as stone all winter. This is the part Sarah loved, Caleb said, driving his shovel into the earth. She'd spend hours out here, planning what to plant where. Drew little maps and everything. Do you still have them? The maps? He straightened up, leaning on the shovel. Yeah. In a trunk upstairs. Never could bring myself to throw them out. Could I see them? He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. That evening he brought down the trunk. It was cedar, carved with flowers. Inside were folded papers, pressed flowers, a child's drawings, other small treasures. Leanne handled everything carefully, reverently. These were pieces of lives that had ended too soon. They deserved respect. The garden maps were detailed and precise. Sarah had beautiful handwriting, each plant labeled in neat script. Notes in the margins about sun exposure and watering schedules. We could use these, Leanne said. Follow her plans. You think? Why not? She clearly knew what she was doing, and it would be... She searched for the right word. It would be like keeping something of her alive. Growing what she wanted to grow. Caleb touched the edge of one of the maps, his fingers gentle. She'd like that, knowing someone was still using them. So they followed Sarah's plans, planted where she'd indicated, Beans here, carrots there, tomatoes against the south wall where they'd get the most sun. It felt right somehow, like honoring a promise that had never been spoken. As they worked, Lian found herself telling Caleb about her own life, about growing up in Guangdong, about the village where everyone knew everyone and gossip traveled faster than news, about her mother's herb garden and her father's fishing boat. "I thought America would be so different," she said, patting dirt around a seedling. "Thought it would be this place where you could be anything, do anything. Turns out it's pretty much the same, just colder." "You regret coming?" She considered that. "I regret losing my husband. I regret the mines and the poverty and the loneliness. But if I hadn't come here, I wouldn't be here now, with you. So I don't know. Is that strange?" "No, I don't think it is." They finished planting as the sun set, both of them tired and dirty and satisfied in a way that only hard work could bring. That night, after dinner, Caleb pulled out a bottle of whiskey from somewhere, poured them each a small glass. "To Sarah," he said, raising his. "And the garden she designed." "To Sarah," Lian echoed. They drank. The whiskey burned going down, but left a warm glow in its wake. "And to Thomas," Caleb continued, "who would have loved digging in the dirt." "To Thomas." Another drink. Caleb's eyes were bright now, emotional but not quite crying. "And to Jiang Wei," he said, surprising her, "who brought you here even though he didn't know where you'd end up." Lian's throat tightened. "To Wei." She drank, and this time the tears did come. Just a few, sliding hot down her cheeks. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. Squeezed it once, firm and warm. They sat like that for a while, holding hands across the table, honoring their dead in the only way they knew how. Later, as Lian climbed the ladder to the loft, Caleb spoke. "I'm glad you're here." She looked down at him. "Me too." Simple words, but they meant everything. The next morning, Lian woke to the sound of horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. She scrambled down the ladder. Caleb was already at the window, his face hard. "Who is it?" she asked. "Don't know yet, but they're coming here deliberate." She joined him at the window. 3 riders moving across the valley toward the cabin. Even from a distance, she could tell they weren't friendly. Something about the way they sat their horses, the speed they were moving. "Get upstairs," Caleb said quietly. "What?" "No, Lian, get upstairs, now." The tone of his voice left no room for argument. She climbed back to the loft, but positioned herself where she could see down into the room. Caleb pulled a rifle down from over the door, checked that it was loaded. Then he waited, standing in the center of the room, the rifle held loose and ready. The horses thundered up to the cabin. Lian heard boots hitting the ground, heavy footsteps on the porch. A fist pounded on the door. "Vance, open up!" Caleb didn't move. "State your business." "This is Douglas. You know damn well what my business is." Douglas, the neighbor who'd started the rumors about Sarah, who'd wanted Caleb's land. Lian's blood went cold. "You're not welcome here, Douglas. You and your boys need to leave." "Not until we talk about that Chinese whore you're keeping." The words were meant to provoke, and they worked. Lian saw Caleb's knuckles go white on the rifle, but his voice stayed calm. "Last chance. Leave now, or I start shooting." "You're gonna fire on white men to protect a Chinaman's widow? You that far gone, Vance." "I'm protecting what's mine, same as I'd protect my livestock or my land. Now get gone." There was muttering outside. Then Douglas spoke again, his voice harder now. "Town's got questions, Vance, about what you're doing up here, about whether she's really just working for you or if there's something else going on. What I do on my own land is my concern. Not when it affects the whole community. Not when you're setting a bad example, showing others it's okay to—" The rifle shot was deafening in the small cabin. Lian jumped, her heart hammering. Outside, someone yelled. Horses whinnied and stamped. "That was over your heads," Caleb called out. "Next one won't be. You've got 10 seconds to mount up and ride out. After that, I start putting holes in things I aim at." More muttering. Then the sound of boots scrambling, saddles creaking. "This isn't over, Vance." "Yeah, it is. And if you come back here, you better come with the law or don't come at all. Because I'll shoot trespassers on sight. That's my right." The horses galloped away. Caleb stood at the window until the sound faded completely. Then he set the rifle down, and Leon saw his hands were shaking. She climbed down quickly. "Are you—" "I'm fine." But he didn't look fine. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "They'll come back." "Maybe. Maybe not. Douglas is a coward, always has been. Likes to talk tough, but folds when someone pushes back. But what if they bring others? What if—" Caleb turned to face her. "Leon, listen to me. I've been alone up here for 7 years. I've dealt with Douglas and people like him before. They're bullies. They only have power if you give it to them. You think I gave Croft power when he told me to crawl? No. I think he took it because he could. Because you were alone and desperate." Caleb's voice softened. "But you're not alone anymore. And anyone who wants to get to you has to go through me first. That's a fact they're just now learning." Leon wanted to believe him, wanted to feel as confident as he sounded, but she'd seen what happened when people decided someone didn't belong. She'd lived through it. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it make you small again. Don't let them win by making you believe you don't deserve to be here." "Do I, though? Deserve to be here?" "Yes." No hesitation. "You work hard. You pull your weight. You've made this place better in the weeks you've been here. That's all that matters." He pulled her into a hug then, sudden and fierce. Leon stood frozen for a second, then wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. They stood like that in the middle of the cabin, holding each other, while outside the spring morning continued its slow unfolding. When they finally pulled apart, both of them looked embarrassed. "Sorry," Caleb muttered. Don't apologize. I needed that." "Me too." They spent the rest of the day working close to the cabin, both of them jumping at shadows, expecting Douglas to return with reinforcements, but he didn't come. The day passed quiet and tense. That night, neither of them slept well. Leanne could hear Caleb pacing below, keeping watch. Part of her wanted to go down, to sit with him. But she didn't want to seem afraid, didn't want to be weak. Pride. She recognized it for what it was. The same pride that had almost made her crawl for bread. She climbed down the ladder. Caleb looked up, surprised. "Can't sleep? Can you?" "No." "Then we might as well not sleep together." The words came out wrong, and they both realized it at the same time. Leanne felt her face heat. I know what you meant." Was that amusement in his voice? They sat at the table with lukewarm coffee, neither quite meeting the other's eyes. "I was thinking," Leanne said finally, "about what you said, about not being alone anymore." "Yeah?" "It goes both ways. You're not alone either. Not anymore." Caleb looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something shift in his expression, something that might have been hope. "No," he said quietly. "I guess I'm not." Outside, the wind picked up. Spring wind, different from winter's razor edge. Softer, full of promise. And inside the cabin, two people sat together in the darkness, not talking, not needing to, just being, just there, together. 3 weeks passed without incident. 3 weeks of watching the valley for riders that never came. 3 weeks of Caleb keeping the rifle closer than usual and Leanne flinching at every unexpected sound. But Douglas didn't return. And slowly, carefully, they both started to breathe easier. The garden grew. Tiny green shoots pushed through the dark soil, reaching for the sun. Leanne checked them every morning, marveling at how something so fragile could be so determined to live. "They're doing good," Caleb said one morning, crouching beside her to examine a row of beans. "Better than I expected for this early." Sarah knew what she was doing. Yeah, she did. The chickens started laying more as the days lengthened. Leanne gathered eggs in her apron, still getting a small thrill every time she found one. Something about the warm weight of them felt like abundance. One afternoon, Caleb came back from checking the fence line with news. Saw smoke from the McAllister place. They're back from wintering in town. Leanne looked up from the shirt she was mending. Will they be a problem?" "Nah, Mac's good people. Keeps to himself mostly. His wife Emma's friendly enough." He paused. "Thought maybe we should ride over. Let them know you're here before they hear it from someone else." "Do we have to?" "Don't have to do anything, but it'd be smart. Better they meet you proper than just hear rumors." Leanne set down her mending. When? Tomorrow, maybe, if you're up for it. She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. They rode out the next morning, Caleb on his bay and Leanne on the old mare he'd brought up from the barn. She wasn't a strong rider yet, but the mare was patient with her fumbling. The McAllister ranch was smaller than Caleb's, tucked into a valley with a creek running through it. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Leanne could see laundry hanging on a line. A dog started barking as they approached. A man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. He was shorter than Caleb, stocky, with red hair going gray at the temples. "Vance," he called. "That you?" "It's me, Mac." "Well, I'll be damned. Haven't seen you in near about a year." McAllister's eyes shifted to Leanne, curious but not hostile. "And you brought company." They dismounted. Caleb made introductions simple and direct. "This is Leanne Joe. She's working for me." "Leanne, this is Malcolm McAllister." "Ma'am?" McAllister tipped his hat. "Pleasure." Leanne nodded, not trusting her voice yet. The door of the house opened and a woman came out, wiping her hands on her apron. She was round and comfortable looking, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. "Caleb Vance, as I live and breathe," she said, smiling. "Get yourself up here and give me a hug." Caleb actually looked embarrassed, but he climbed the porch steps and let Emma McAllister pull him into an embrace. "You're too thin," she scolded, pulling back to look at him. "I swear you'd starve if someone didn't—" She stopped, noticing Leanne for the first time. "Oh, who's this?" "This is Leanne. She's helping out at my place." Emma's eyes went sharp and assessing, but not cruel, just taking measure. "Is that so? Well, come inside, both of you. I've got coffee on and bread just out of the oven." The McAllister house was warm and cluttered in the way of a place where people actually lived. Children's drawings on the walls, books scattered on tables, a cat sleeping in a patch of sunlight. They sat around a scarred wooden table while Emma poured coffee and sliced bread thick, spreading it with butter and honey. "Our boys are out checking the herd," Emma said, settling into her chair. "You'll meet them later. James is 16 now. Can you believe it? And Peter's 14, growing like weeds." "Time moves," Caleb said. "That it does." Emma turned her attention to Leanne. "So you're working for Caleb. Doing what, if you don't mind me asking?" Leanne found her voice. "Cooking, cleaning, garden, whatever needs doing." "And you came from where?" "Prosperity Creek." "Ah." Something flickered across Emma's face. Understanding, maybe. "That's a rough town for someone on their own." "Yes, ma'am." "Well, you're welcome to visit here any time. It's nice to have another woman nearby. Gets lonely out here sometimes, with just menfolk around." The kindness in her voice was unexpected. Leanne felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Thank you." They talked for an hour, Emma doing most of the talking while Malcolm added comments here and there. News from town, gossip about neighbors, complaints about the weather, normal things, human things. Caleb was quieter than usual, but he seemed comfortable here in a way Leanne hadn't seen before, like these people were safe. As they were getting ready to leave, Emma pulled Leanne aside. "Listen," she said quietly, "I don't know your story, and I'm not asking, but I want you to know. If you ever need help or just someone to talk to, you come here, day or night. You understand?" "Why would you?" "Because I know what it's like to be alone in a place that doesn't want you. I came from Ireland when I was 17, didn't speak English right, didn't know the customs. People treated me like I was stupid or worse." She squeezed Leanne's hand. "So I'm telling you what I wish someone had told me. You're not alone. Not anymore." Leanne's eyes burned. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet, just remember it." On the ride back, Caleb was quiet. Finally, he spoke. "That went better than I expected. They were kind. Emma especially. She's got a good heart, always has." He paused. "Mac asked me something before we left. Asked if you and I were, you know." "What did you tell him?" "Told him no. Told him you work for me and that's all." He glanced at her. "That okay?" "Yes. Yes." But something in her chest twisted when he said it. Some small part of her that had started hoping for something different. She pushed the feeling down, ignored it. She was here to work, to survive. Nothing more. The days grew longer and warmer. April melted into May. The garden flourished under Leanne's careful tending. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of chores that kept everything running. Caleb taught her to shoot. Started with the rifle, showing her how to hold it, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. "Why do I need to know this?" she asked. "Because you should be able to protect yourself. If I'm out working and someone comes around, you should be able to handle it." She thought of Douglas, of his boys, of the way they'd threatened and postured. "Okay," she said, "teach me." She wasn't a natural. Her shots went wide more often than not, but she kept at it, stubborn, until she could at least hit the target more times than she missed. "Good enough," Caleb said after a particularly successful round. "You won't win any competitions, but you could stop someone if you had to. Let's hope I never have to." "Let's hope. But hope's not a plan." One evening in mid-May, as they were finishing dinner, Caleb cleared his throat in that way he did when he was about to say something difficult. "Been thinking," he said, "about going to town. We need supplies, and I want to sell those eggs we've been stockpiling." Leon's stomach clenched. "When?" "Day after tomorrow, maybe. Get it done before it gets too hot." "Do I have to come?" "No. You can stay here if you want, but—" He hesitated. "But I think it might be good if you did. Show people you're not hiding, that you've got nothing to be ashamed of." "I'm not ashamed." "I know. But they don't know that, and the longer you stay away, the more they'll make up stories about why." He was right. She hated it, but he was right. "Okay," she said. "I'll come." The next day and a half, Leanne practiced what she'd say if people asked her questions. Practiced keeping her voice steady, her head up. She'd learned a lot in 2 months with Caleb. Learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing it anyway. They set out early in the morning, the wagon loaded with crates of eggs carefully packed in straw. The ride to town felt longer than Leanne remembered. Every mile brought more tension to her shoulders, more tightness to her chest. Prosperity Creek looked the same as always, muddy and tired and mean. Caleb drove the wagon straight to Croft's Mercantile. Leanne noticed people stopping to stare. A woman grabbed her child's hand and hurried across the street. 2 men outside the saloon nudged each other and laughed. "Ignore them," Caleb said quietly. Inside the store, Croft's face went through its usual progression of emotions when he saw them. But this time there was something else too. Wariness, maybe, or respect. "Vance," he said, "what can I do for you?" "Got eggs to sell." 4 dozen, all fresh." Croft examined the crates with a critical eye. Though Lyon could tell he was just going through the motions. The eggs were perfect, and he knew it. "I can give you 8 cents a dozen." 12. "That's robbery." "That's the price. You know mine are better than anything else you get." Croft's jaw worked, but he nodded. "Fine. 12. While Caleb handled the transaction, Leanne wandered through the store. She needed thread and some fabric if they could afford it. Her dresses were wearing thin and summer was coming. She was examining a bolt of calico when she heard voices behind her. "Shame, isn't it?" "What's that?" "Vance taking up with that Chinese woman. Man's lost his mind." Leanne went very still. The voices belonged to 2 women she didn't recognize, standing near the counter. "I heard she's actually living with him. In his house." "No." "It's true. My husband says everyone knows about it, says it's scandalous." "Someone should do something." "What can you do? Vance doesn't listen to anyone, never has." Leanne's hands shook as she put down the fabric. She wanted to turn around, to confront them, to tell them they didn't know anything about her or Caleb or what they had. But her throat was tight and her voice wouldn't come. Then Caleb was there, appearing at her elbow, like he'd materialized from thin air. "Found what you need?" he asked, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Yes," she managed. "Good. Let's get it and go." He turned to the women, his face expressionless. "Ladies." They had the grace to look embarrassed. One of them flushed red and suddenly became very interested in a display of ribbons. Caleb helped Leanne gather her supplies, paid for everything without comment. Then they walked out together, his hand on her elbow, steady and sure. Outside, Leanne took a shaky breath. "You heard them?" "Hard not to." "I'm sorry. I'm making your life harder. Maybe I should—" "Don't." His voice was sharp. "Don't you dare apologize for existing. Those women don't know anything. They're bored and mean and looking for something to make themselves feel important. But they're right. People are talking. Let them talk. Words can't hurt us unless we let them. That's easy for you to say. You're... She stopped. I'm what? White? A man? He shook his head. You think I don't know what it's like to be talked about? After Sarah and Thomas died, people said things. Terrible things. Said I must have done something to deserve it. Said it was punishment for my pride or my anger or whatever else they decided was wrong with me. His voice went rough. I learned a long time ago that people will find reasons to hate you no matter what you do. So you might as well live your life the way you want and let them choke on it. The words hit Leon like cold water, bracing and necessary. You're right. I know I am. That doesn't make it easier. No, but it makes it possible. They loaded the supplies into the wagon and started to leave. But as they passed the general store for the last time, Leon made a decision. Stop, she said. Caleb pulled the horses to a halt. What's wrong? Nothing, but I need to do something. She climbed down from the wagon and walked back into the store. The two women were still there, now joined by a third. They looked up as she entered, surprise on their faces. Leon walked straight to the counter where Croft stood. I want to buy something, she said clearly. What's that? She pointed to a bolt of red fabric, expensive silk, the kind she'd never have dared touch before. 5 yards of that. Croft's eyebrows shot up. That's $3 a yard. I know what it costs. She pulled out the money Caleb had given her for her share of the egg sales, counted out $15 and placed them on the counter. 5 yards? The store had gone completely quiet. Everyone watching. Croft cut the fabric slowly, his movements stiff, wrapped it in brown paper and handed it to her. Leon took it. Then she turned to the three women who'd been gossiping. Thank you, she said politely, for reminding me that I don't need your approval to live my life. She walked out before they could respond. Caleb was trying not to smile when she climbed back into the wagon. That was something. That was stupid. I just spent $15 on fabric I don't need. You needed it, just not for sewing. She looked at him, saw the approval in his eyes, the pride. Let's go home, she said. Home. The word came out without thinking, but it felt right. They drove out of Prosperity Creek with the red silk sitting between them on the bench, bright as a flag, bright as defiance. The weeks that followed were peaceful in a way Leon had almost forgotten was possible. The garden produced its first real harvest, lettuce and radishes and peas. Small things, but they tasted like victory. Caleb started teaching her to ride properly, not just sitting on the mare while she plodded along, but actually riding. How to post to the trot, how to use her legs, how to communicate with the horse. You're getting better, he said one afternoon after she successfully cantered in a circle without losing her balance. I'm getting less terrible. Same thing. They were working together more now, side by side in the garden, in the barn, around the ranch. The silences between them felt comfortable instead of awkward. But there were moments, small moments that felt charged with something neither of them would name. Like the time Caleb lifted her down from the wagon and his hands lingered on her waist a second longer than necessary. Or when Leanne was mending his shirt and found herself studying his shoulders, the way he moved, before catching herself and looking away. Or the evening they both reached for the coffee pot at the same time and their fingers brushed, and for a heartbeat neither of them moved. These moments came and went, unacknowledged, stored away. One night in early June they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The air was warm and sweet with the smell of growing things. Been 2 months, Caleb said suddenly. What? Since you came here, it's been 2 months. Leon realized he was right. 2 months since the storm. 2 months since her life had changed completely. Feels longer, she said. In a good way. Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. You ever think about leaving? Going somewhere else? The question surprised her. Do you want me to leave? No, that's not... He ran a hand through his hair. I just want to make sure you're staying because you want to, not because you think you have to. I want to, she said firmly. I'm staying because I want to. Good. That's good. More silence. The sun sank lower, painting the sky orange and pink. Can I ask you something? Leon said. Sure. Why did you really help me that day? In the store? Caleb took a long time to answer. When he did, his voice was low. Because I looked at you and I saw Sarah. Not that you're like her, you're not. But I saw someone good being treated like dirt. Someone who deserved better. And I thought, if I could help one person, if I could stop one bad thing from happening, maybe that would balance out some of the bad things I couldn't stop. That's not your responsibility. I know, but it felt like it should be. Leanne reached over and took his hand. Just held it, their fingers intertwined. You're a good man, Caleb Vance. I'm really not. You are. You just don't want to admit it. He looked at their joined hands. You make it hard to stay miserable. You know that? Good. You've been miserable long enough. They sat like that until the stars came out, holding hands on the porch, not talking about what it meant. Not yet. But soon. The next morning, Leanne was gathering eggs when she heard horses. Her heart jumped into her throat. She grabbed the rifle Caleb had started, insisting she keep nearby, and moved to where she could see the road. 3 riders. But not Douglas this time. Emma McAllister was in the lead, riding side saddle on a gray mare. Behind her were her 2 sons, both lanky and red-haired like their father. Leanne set down the rifle and walked out to meet them. Emma, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, honey. Just came to visit. Emma dismounted with practiced ease. Boys, take the horses to the barn and give them some water. The sons obeyed without argument, though they both stared at Leanne with open curiosity. Is Caleb here? Emma asked. He's out checking the fence line. Should be back soon. Good. That'll give us time to talk. They went inside and Leanne made tea. Emma settled into a chair like she'd been there 100 times. I'm going to be direct, Emma said, because that's how I am, and I figure you appreciate it. Okay. Word around the territory is that you and Caleb are, well, they're saying things, and I wanted to come tell you in person that Malcolm and I don't give a damn what people say. We like you. We like Caleb. And if you two are happy, that's all that matters. Leanne felt her face heat. It's not like that. I work for him. Honey, I've seen how he looks at you and how you look at him. It's okay. I'm not judging. I'm just saying, whatever's happening or not happening between you two, you have friends, people who will stand by you. Emma leaned forward. Because there's going to be trouble. You know that, right? What kind of trouble? The Douglas kind. He's been making noise in town, saying things about Caleb corrupting the morals of the community, about you being a bad influence. He's trying to get people riled up. Why does he care so much? Because he's a small man who gets his power from making other people small, and because Caleb's refused to bend to him for 7 years and that eats at him. Emma's voice was grim. I'm telling you this so you're prepared. Douglas won't let this go. He'll keep pushing until something breaks. Fear crawled up Leanne's spine. What should we do? Be ready. Keep that rifle close, and know that you're not alone. If Douglas comes around causing trouble, you send one of my boys and Malcolm will be here with every man he can round up. Why would you do that for us? Emma smiled. Because that's what neighbors do, and because bullies like Douglas need to learn they can't just run roughshod over everyone. They talked for another hour before Emma left, her sons in tow. Leanne watched them ride away, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and dread. When Caleb came back, she told him everything. His face went hard. Douglas is an idiot, but he's a dangerous idiot. What do? We do what we've been doing. We live our lives. We don't give him power by acting scared. He paused. But we stay alert, and we make sure we're ready if he tries something. That night, Caleb brought his bedroll down from the loft and slept by the door, the rifle within arm's reach. Leanne lay awake in the darkness above, listening to him breathe. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. They'd face it together, like they faced everything now, together. Douglas came on a Tuesday. Leanne was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the horses. 6 of them this time, not 3. She straightened slowly, her hand going to the pistol Caleb had started making her wear on her hip. Caleb emerged from the barn, the rifle already in his hands. He didn't look surprised, just tired. Stay behind me, he said quietly as she approached. No. He looked at her sharply. Leanne, no, I'm done hiding. If they're here for me, they can face me. Something flickered in his eyes. Pride, maybe? Or fear? But he didn't argue. The riders came up the road in formation, deliberate and slow. Douglas in the lead, his face red even from a distance. 5 men behind him, all armed. They stopped 30 feet from the cabin, close enough to talk, far enough to make their intentions clear. "Vance," Douglas called out, "we need to have a conversation, then talk. Not out here. This is official business, territory business." Caleb's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Official business? You're a rancher, Douglas, not a lawman. I'm a concerned citizen, and these men with me represent the community of Prosperity Creek. We've come to address a situation that's gotten out of hand." "What situation would that be?" Douglas's eyes slid to Lion. "The situation of you harboring a Chinese woman in violation of public decency. The situation of you setting a bad example for the rest of us trying to maintain proper standards." "Proper standards," Caleb repeated, his voice flat. "That what you call it?" "This territory has laws about miscegenation, about proper behavior between the races. What you're doing here, I'm employing someone to help run my ranch. There's no law against that. We both know it's more than that. Everyone knows it." Douglas leaned forward in his saddle. "You're living in sin with a Chinaman's widow, Vance, making a mockery of Christian values and white dignity, and we're here to tell you it stops, today." The word Christian hung in the air like smoke. Leanne felt Caleb tense beside her. "I don't recall asking for your opinion on how I live my life," Caleb said quietly. "And I sure as hell don't recall giving you permission to come onto my property making threats." "It's not a threat. It's an ultimatum." Douglas straightened in his saddle. "You send her away, today. She goes back to town or wherever else she wants to go, but she doesn't stay here. You do that, and we forget this whole mess ever happened. And if I don't, then we make you, one way or another." The men behind Douglas shifted, hands moving toward their guns. Not drawing, not yet. But the message was clear. Caleb raised the rifle slightly, not pointing it at anyone, just making its presence known. "You're trespassing," he said. "You and your boys need to turn around and ride out, now, before someone does something stupid." "We're not leaving without—" "Yes, you are." The voice came from behind them. Everyone turned. Malcolm McAllister sat on his horse at the edge of the property, his 2 sons flanking him, all 3 armed, and behind them 4 more riders. Men Leanne didn't recognize, but their faces were hard and ready. "This is none of your concern, McAllister," Douglas said, but some of the confidence had leaked out of his voice. "The hell it's not. Caleb's my neighbor, my friend, and you're threatening him on his own land." Malcolm walked his horse forward slowly. "That makes it my concern. We're not threatening anyone, we're just— You rode onto his property with 6 armed men and gave him an ultimatum. I'd call that a threat." Malcolm stopped his horse next to Caleb's position. "Now I'm going to give you one. You and your boys get off this land right now, or we're going to have a serious problem." Douglas looked between Caleb and Malcolm and the men arrayed behind them. His face was red with fury, but he wasn't stupid enough to start a gunfight. He'd probably lose. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah," Caleb said. "It is. Because if you come back here again, I'm going to shoot you for trespassing. And I'm well within my rights to do that. So whatever you think you're accomplishing, whatever point you think you're making, let it go. Find something else to care about, because this is done." Douglas stared at him for a long moment. Then he jerked his reins and turned his horse. His men followed, but one of them, a young kid, couldn't have been more than 19, looked back at Lan as he rode away. There wasn't hate in his eyes, just confusion, like he couldn't quite figure out what all the fuss was about. They watched until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Then Caleb lowered the rifle and let out a long breath. "Thank you," he said to Malcolm. "Don't thank me yet. Douglas is going to make trouble. Maybe not here, but somewhere." "Let him try." Malcolm looked at Leanne. "You okay, miss?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. You need anything? You send word. We're not far." He tipped his hat. "Boys." The McAllisters and their friends rode off, leaving Caleb and Leanne standing alone in front of the cabin. Leanne's legs suddenly felt weak. She sat down hard on the porch steps. Caleb sat beside her, setting the rifle carefully within reach. "You were brave, standing your ground like that." "I was terrified." "Yeah, me too." They sat in silence for a while, letting the adrenaline drain away. "He's not going to stop," Leanne said finally. "Douglas, He's the kind of man who can't let things go. Probably not. So what do we do? Caleb turned to look at her. Really look at her. We live our lives. We keep doing what we're doing, and we don't give him the satisfaction of making us scared. He paused. Unless you want to leave, I'd understand if I'm not leaving. Even knowing he'll keep trying, keep making trouble, especially knowing that. Leon met his eyes. I spent 3 months in Prosperity Creek being invisible, being nothing, letting people like Croft and Douglas decide what I was worth. I'm done with that. If Douglas wants me gone, he's going to have to do a lot more than show up with threats. Caleb smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. You've changed since that day in the store. So have you. Have I? You're not alone anymore. You talk more, smile more. She searched for the right word. You're alive again. Not just existing. He looked away, but she saw his throat work as he swallowed. You did that. You and your stubborn refusal to give up. We did it together. The sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple, beautiful and harsh at the same time, like everything else in this place. Leanne, Caleb said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart stuttered. Okay. When Sarah died, I thought I was done with everything. Love, happiness, connection, all of it. I thought the best I could hope for was to get through each day without feeling too much. He finally looked at her. But then you showed up, and you made me remember that there's more to life than just surviving, that there's still good things worth fighting for. Caleb, I'm not good at this, talking about feelings. Never have been. But I need you to know that having you here these past months, it's meant everything. You mean everything. Leanne felt tears prick her eyes. You mean everything to me, too. They sat there as the sky darkened, shoulders touching, neither quite ready to say more, but both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. That night, Leanne lay in the loft, unable to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the confrontation with Douglas. The way Caleb had stood firm, the way Malcolm had backed them up, the way that young Ryder had looked at her with confusion instead of hatred. Maybe things could change. Maybe not everyone in Montana Territory was like Douglas and Croft. Maybe there was room for someone like her after all. She must have eventually dozed off because she woke to the smell of smoke, not wood smoke. Something else. Something wrong. She scrambled to the edge of the loft. The cabin was full of gray haze, getting thicker by the second. Caleb, she shouted. He was already up, already moving toward the door. The barn's on fire! Leanne climbed down the ladder so fast she almost fell. Through the window she could see flames licking up the side of the barn, orange and angry against the night sky. They ran outside together. The heat hit her like a physical blow. The barn was fully engulfed, flames roaring up into the darkness. The horse! Caleb shouted, running toward the inferno. Leanne grabbed his arm. You can't! It's too late! He tried to pull away, but she held on with desperate strength. The barn's roof collapsed inward with a crash and a shower of sparks. If Caleb had gone in, he would have died. They stood helpless, watching everything burn. The horse, the tools, the winter hay they'd stored, all of it consumed in minutes. When the worst of it was over, when the barn was just a smoldering skeleton, Caleb walked the perimeter. Leanne followed. He stopped at the back corner and crouched down, picked up something and held it up to the moonlight. A torch. Partially burned but still recognizable. Douglas, Caleb said. The word came out cold and hard. You don't know that for sure. Who else? He stood, the torch still in his hand. He knew he couldn't force you out directly, so he's trying to burn us out instead. Leanne looked at the ruins of the barn, at the smoke still rising into the night sky. What do? We go to town, tomorrow. We report this to whatever passes for law around here, and we make sure everyone knows what Douglas did. They won't believe us. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But we're going to tell them anyway, because that's what you do. You stand up and you speak the truth even when people don't want to hear it. They spent the rest of the night watching the embers, making sure the fire didn't spread. When dawn came, the barn was gone. Just a black scar on the land and the smell of smoke heavy in the air. The horse was dead. Leanne found that harder than she expected. The old bay gelding had been gentle and patient, teaching her to ride without complaint. Now he was gone. They buried him on the hill behind the cabin, next to the graves of Sarah and Thomas. It felt right somehow, laying him to rest with the others who'd been lost. When it was done, Caleb stood looking at the 3 graves for a long moment. "I'm tired of losing things," he said. "Me too. I'm tired of people like Douglas thinking they can take whatever they want, do whatever they want. So let's stop them." He looked at her. "How?" "By not backing down. By going to town and telling everyone what happened. By refusing to be quiet and small and convenient." Leon felt something fierce and hot burning in her chest. "By showing them that we matter, that we're not going away." Caleb nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it." They rode to Prosperity Creek on the old mare, taking turns walking to spare the horse. It took most of the morning. The town was busy when they arrived, people going about their daily business. But conversation stopped when Caleb and Leanne walked down the main street. People stared, whispered. Let them, Leanne thought. Let them stare. Caleb headed straight for the small building that served as the territorial office. The man inside was older, gray-haired, with the soft look of someone who'd spent too long behind a desk. "Mr. Parker," Caleb said. "I need to report a crime." Parker looked up from his paperwork. "What kind of crime?" "Arson. Someone burned down my barn last night, killed my horse." "That's unfortunate. You have any proof?" Caleb set the torch on the desk. "Found this. Someone came onto my property and deliberately set the fire." Parker examined the torch without touching it. "This could be anything. Doesn't prove it was Douglas," Caleb said flatly. "He threatened me yesterday, told me to send Leon away or face consequences. This is those consequences." Now, Caleb, that's a serious accusation. You can't just go around claiming, "I can and I am. Douglas committed arson. He destroyed my property, and I want something done about it." "Do you have witnesses? Anyone who saw him do it?" "No, but then there's nothing I can do. Your word against his." Parker leaned back in his chair. "And between you and me, Vance, you're not doing yourself any favors keeping that Chinese woman around. People are upset. Feelings are running high. You can't be surprised when what?" Caleb's voice was dangerous now. "When someone tries to burn me out? When they kill my horse? That's acceptable to you?" "I'm not saying it's acceptable. I'm saying it's understandable. You're provoking people." "I'm living my life. You're living in sin with a—" "Careful." The word cracked like a whip. "Very careful how you finish that sentence." Parker's face reddened, but he had enough sense to stop talking. Leanne had been standing quietly through the exchange, but now she stepped forward. "I want to file a complaint too." Parker looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "You?" "Yes. Against Silas Croft. For the way he treated me. For trying to humiliate me. That was months ago." "So? Is there a time limit on dignity?" "Miss, I don't think you understand how things work here. I understand perfectly. You protect men like Douglas and Croft because they're white and they have money and they make you feel important. Meanwhile, people like me and Caleb, we're supposed to just accept whatever cruelty you hand out. Well, I'm done accepting it. Now you listen here." "No. You listen." Leanne's voice rose. "I'm a human being. I deserve respect. I deserve safety. And if you won't provide that, if you won't do your job and investigate actual crimes, then everyone needs to know that. Everyone needs to know that this territory protects bullies and punishes victims." Parker stood up, his face going from red to purple. "I think you'd better leave." "We're not leaving," Caleb said. "Not until you file our reports." "I don't have to file anything." "Actually, you do. It's your job. Unless you want to explain to the territorial governor why you're refusing to investigate arson." The threat landed. Parker sat back down, grabbed a pen with jerky movements, and started writing. "Fine. Give me the details." They gave him everything. Times, places, descriptions, the confrontation with Douglas, the threats, the burned barn, all of it on record. When they were done, Parker shoved the papers across the desk. "There, satisfied?" "Not even close," Caleb said. "But it's a start." They walked out of the office and back onto the street. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the raised voices. Silas Croft was among them, his arms crossed, his face smug. Caleb stopped in front of him. "Something you want to say?" Croft asked. "Just one thing. The debt you claimed Lyon's husband owed? I looked into it. Talked to the mine foreman. There was no debt. You made it up." Croft's smug expression faltered. "That's a lie." "No, what you told her was a lie. And everyone here needs to know that. You tried to humiliate a grieving widow over a debt that didn't exist. You told her to crawl like a dog for stale bread." Caleb's voice carried across the street. "That's the kind of man you are, and people should know it. You can't prove anything. I don't need to prove it. I know it. She knows it. And deep down, everyone here knows it too. They've just been too scared or too complicit to say anything." Big talk from a man who's living with a Chinese. Caleb moved so fast, Croft didn't have time to react. One moment he was talking, the next he was on his back in the dirt with Caleb standing over him. "Say it," Caleb said quietly. "Finish that sentence. I dare you." Croft stayed down, breathing hard, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. Caleb turned to the crowd. "Anyone else have something they want to say? About me? About Leanne? Now's your chance." Silence. People looked away, shuffled their feet. Then a voice spoke up. "I got something to say." Emma McAllister pushed through the crowd, her husband right behind her. "I want to say that Caleb Vance is a good man who's been done wrong by this town. And Leon Joe is a brave woman who deserves better than she's gotten." She looked around at the assembled faces. "Shame on all of you. Shame on you for standing by while good people suffer, for caring more about your small-minded prejudices than about basic human decency." "Emma," someone started. "I'm not done. Malcolm and I have decided something. Anyone who has a problem with Caleb and Leanne can consider themselves not welcome at our place. We don't need friends who think cruelty is acceptable. We don't need neighbors who care more about the color of someone's skin than the content of their character." A few people in the crowd looked uncomfortable. One woman, the one in the green dress from that first day, actually looked ashamed, but most just looked angry or stubborn or both. Malcolm stepped forward next to his wife. "Emma's right. This has gone far enough. Caleb's done nothing wrong except live his life the way he sees fit. And if that bothers you, that's your problem, not his." The crowd started to break up, people muttering and moving away. Some shot angry looks back at Caleb and Leanne. Others just looked confused, like they couldn't quite figure out what had happened or whose side they were supposed to be on. Croft picked himself up from the dirt and disappeared into his store without a word. When it was just the six of them, Caleb, Leanne, the McAllisters, and their two sons, Emma pulled Leanne into a hug. "You were magnificent," she said. "Absolutely magnificent. I was terrified." "That's what made it brave." Malcolm shook Caleb's hand. "What are you going to do now? About the barn?" "Rebuild. What else can I do?" "We'll help. Me and the boys. Some of the other men, too, if I can convince them. You shouldn't have to do it alone." "I appreciate that." They talked for a few more minutes, making plans. Then the McAllisters left, and Caleb and Leanne were alone again. "You punched him," Leanne said. "Yeah. I didn't know you had that in you." "Neither did I." Caleb rubbed his knuckles. "Probably shouldn't have done it." "Probably not, but I'm glad you did." They started walking toward where they'd left the mare. But as they passed the general store, the door opened. The woman in the green dress stepped out. She looked nervous. "Mr. Vance? Miss Joe?" They stopped. "I just wanted to say—" She twisted her hands together. "I'm sorry for that day, for what I said about you. It was wrong." "Yes," Leanne said simply. "It was. I'd like to make it right. If I can. If you'd let me." Caleb and Leanne exchanged a look. Then Leanne nodded. "Come visit sometime. We'll talk." The woman's face lit up. "Really?" "Really. But know that if you come, we're going to expect you to actually see us, not what you think we are. Us." "I will. I promise." She went back inside, and Caleb and Leanne continued walking. "Think she'll actually come?" Caleb asked. "Maybe. Maybe not. But at least she asked." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence. The burned barn was still there, still a black scar. But somehow it looked less devastating now, like it was just a problem to solve instead of the end of everything. Over the next 2 weeks, people came, not everyone, not even most, but some. Malcolm and his sons, true to their word, showed up with lumber and tools. 2 other ranchers Leon didn't know came too, saying they owed Caleb a favor from years back. Even the woman in the green dress, whose name turned out to be Margaret, came one afternoon with fresh bread and an offer to help however she could. They rebuilt the barn together. It wasn't the same as the old one. It was smaller, rougher, but it was solid and it was theirs. On the day they finished, as the sun set on the new structure, Malcolm raised a bottle of whiskey. "To new beginnings," he said. "To new beginnings," they all echoed. That night, after everyone had gone home, Caleb and Leon sat on the porch like they had so many times before. "We did it," Leon said. "We did." "What now?" Caleb took her hand. "Now we live, really live, not just survive. Together? If you'll have me." She turned to look at him. "Is that a question?" "I guess it is. Leon Joe, will you—" "Yes." "I didn't finish asking." "I don't care. The answer is yes." He laughed, a real full laugh that sounded like joy, and pulled her close. They sat like that, wrapped in each other, while the stars came out above them. The next morning, Caleb had an announcement. "I'm going to town, and I want you to come with me." "Why?" "You'll see." They rode in together, and this time Caleb went straight to Parker's office. The territorial clerk looked up with poorly concealed annoyance. "What now, Vance?" "I want to file some papers." "What kind of papers?" Caleb pulled out a folded document. "Deed transfer. I'm putting Leon's name on the ranch, making her a legal partner." Parker's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Never been more serious. Draw up the papers. I'll pay whatever fees are required." "Vance, think about this. You're giving away half your property to my partner, to the person I trust most in this world. Now, are you going to do your job, or do I need to go over your head again?" Parker muttered something under his breath but pulled out the necessary forms. It took an hour to fill everything out, but when they were done, Leon's name was officially on the deed. They walked out of the office into the sunshine, and Leon realized she was shaking. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did. Because if anything happens to me, I need to know you'll be protected, that you'll have a home, that no one can take it away from you. Caleb, and because you've earned it, every day, with your work and your strength and your refusal to give up. That ranch is as much yours as it is mine." Leon threw her arms around him right there in the middle of the street. Let people stare. Let them talk. She didn't care anymore. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," he said back, "for reminding me what it means to be alive." They rode back to the ranch, their ranch, and got back to work. The garden needed weeding, the chickens needed feeding, the cow needed milking, normal things, good things. As summer deepened, life settled into a rhythm that felt less like surviving and more like living. They worked hard during the day and sat together in the evenings, talking or reading or just being quiet. Sometimes Malcolm and Emma would visit, bringing news from town. Douglas had left the territory, apparently, moved south to Colorado. Good riddance, everyone said. Croft's store was struggling. People had started going to Helena for supplies instead, unwilling to give him their business after what he'd done. He'd tried to apologize to Leon once, but she just looked at him and walked away. Some things didn't deserve forgiveness. Margaret became a regular visitor, and eventually a real friend. She helped in the garden and taught Leon how to can vegetables for the winter. She never once mentioned the things she'd said that first day. One evening in late August, Caleb and Leon were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. The valley was golden with late summer light, and the air smelled like grass and growing things. "I've been thinking," Caleb said. "About?" "About the future. About what comes next." Leon waited. "I want to marry you, properly, if you'll have me." She'd known it was coming, had felt it building between them for weeks. But hearing the words still made her heart race. "There are laws," she said, "against that, against us." "I know, but there's also ministers who'll do it anyway. And even if the territory doesn't recognize it, we will. That's what matters. People will talk. Let them. They're already talking. Might as well give them something real to talk about. Lion smiled. Then yes, I'll marry you. Yeah? Yeah. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and it felt like coming home. They married in September, on the hill behind the cabin. Emma stood as witness, Malcolm officiated, and their small circle of friends gathered to watch. It was simple. No fancy dress, no big celebration, just two people making promises to each other while the mountain stood witness. When it was done, when they'd said their vows and exchanged the simple rings Caleb had made from copper wire, Leanne looked out at the valley spread below them. 6 months ago, she'd been starving and desperate, ready to crawl for a piece of stale bread. Now she stood on her own land, next to her husband, surrounded by friends. The world hadn't changed. Montana Territory was still harsh and unforgiving. Prosperity Creek was still full of people like Douglas and Croft. The laws were still unjust. The prejudice was still real. But she had changed. She'd found her strength, her voice, her place. And that made all the difference. That night, as they lay together in the cabin, their cabin, Caleb spoke into the darkness. Do you ever regret it, coming here? Everything you went through? Leanne thought about it, really thought about it. I regret losing Way. I regret the pain and the hunger and the fear, but I don't regret ending up here, with you. She turned to face him. Sometimes the worst things lead us to the best things. We just have to be brave enough to keep going. You're the bravest person I know. So are you. We're a pair then. Yeah, we are. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, the same wind that had howled through the blizzard that first night. But it sounded different now, less threatening, more like a promise of things to come. Morning would bring chores and work and all the challenges of ranch life. Winter would come again, hard and cold and testing. There would be more people like Douglas, more fights to fight, more times when they'd have to stand up and prove they deserved to exist. But they'd face it together. Two people who'd been broken by the world and had somehow managed to put each other back together. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but whole enough, strong enough, enough. Leanne closed her eyes and listened to Caleb's breathing slow into sleep. She thought about the bread she'd almost crawled for, about how close she'd come to losing everything, including herself, and she thought about what she'd found instead. Not just shelter or safety or even love, though those were all there. She'd found herself, the version of herself that had been buried under years of just trying to survive. The woman who could stand in front of men with guns and refuse to back down, who could speak truth to power, who could build something real out of nothing but determination and hope. That was worth more than all the gold in Montana Territory. She fell asleep smiling, her hand in Caleb's, the future stretching out before them like the valley outside their window, vast and challenging and full of possibility. And in the morning, they'd wake up and face it together, the way they faced everything now, as partners, as equals, as home.